Welcome to the Rainbow Studio of the YAHOWAH blog. I'm your host, Craig Winn. Of course, this is our internet sensation. This is the Great Wookiee. Wookiee was actually named after Chewbacca, the Wookiee of Star Wars fame, because he has sort of a Chewbacca look to him. There are times when he has a Chewbacca attitude as well. So he is our lovable rogue. We turned an interesting corner in this series called Appalling Twistianity in our last program that was live streamed yesterday. And in it, what I did is I compared a citation from Galatians where Paul tried to say that the Torah was a curse. And he justified this by misappropriating a citation from Devarim, Deuteronomy, and completely misrepresenting it. And to prove this point, I read a series of 4 translations of Paul's statement. One was the New Living Translation, which is the most popular modern translation, the most esteemed translation, unfortunately, in Christendom is the King James Version. I read that as well. I read the McReynolds Interlinear that accompanies the Nestle Aland 27, which is the most scholastic rendering of the text. And then I provided a translation that I had done that included every Greek word in the text itself, and that was based directly off of the parchments called P45, which is the oldest extant copy of Paul's letters. So I quoted 4 translations, one of my own, a scholastic, the most popular, and the most recent of Paul's letters. And then I presented a literal translation, word for word, including the Hebrew text of what God actually said. And they say exactly the opposite things. And because they are opposite, they are the antithesis of one another, it is first obvious that Paul lied. And it's the single most important point. His point is that because the Torah cannot save, and that the God of the Torah curses humankind through this Torah that cannot save, that he, Paul, was tasked with creating a religion that could bypass the caustic nature of the Torah through what he called his gospel of grace. That is the essence of Pauline Christianity. And make no mistake, the only Christianity that exists is Pauline, because Paul is the one who actually created the myth of Jesus. There was no Jesus ever, and no one ever heard of an Iousu Christou prior to Paul's letter to the Galatians, written in 52 CE. The first 14 books of the Christian New Testament are all Paul's letters, and they begin in 52. The last was written in 66, and it is another 10 years thereafter before Paul's accolade, Mark, and then his propagandist and spiritual healer, Luke, would write the next 3 books. This is the history of Christianity, conceived by Paul and through his letters, which is why we're starting this rebuke of Christianity with its first book, Galatians. The very fact that the pivotal point of Galatians is an outright lie, irrefutable lie. There is no way to challenge what I have just stated, that when it comes to the fulcrum of Pauline Christianity and the New Testament, that his condemnation of Yahweh's Torah, based upon a citation from the Torah that is misappropriated and misrepresented, when it actually says the opposite of the point Paul was trying to make, prove for any informed and rational person that the Christian New Testament is a fraud. There is no independent accounting of a person named Jesus Christ. The earliest attestation to such a person would be Jerome's Antiquity of the Jews, but the earliest manuscript we can find of it dates to the 9th century, 800 years thereafter. All evidence is that the line that is attributed, one sentence, to the presence of a Jesus was actually scribed by Eusebius, who had the only manuscript of Josephus's text. Further, Josephus wasn't even alive in 33 CE. He wouldn't be born for another 5 or 6 years. He wouldn't write for another 40 years. He not only wasn't an eyewitness, he wasn't even alive at the time. And Mark and Luke are not eyewitnesses. Matthew was written by a fraud in 95 CE, generations after the fact, and no one knows who wrote John. John is not a biography anyway, and it was first written in 95 CE by an imposter, we don't know who. No evidence to identify it. There isn't a single contemporaneous eyewitness account to the existence of a Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ never existed. Paul created the myth of Jesus Christ on the basis of two things. One is there actually is a Messiah. There actually is a Son of God. There actually is a Savior. There was an individual who was crucified in 33 CE to fulfill Passover. All of this is true. All of this is proven through the prophets. That man's name is Dode. It's been corrupted to David. But it is Dode who told Daniel around 700 years before he would arrive exactly when he would come to fulfill Chag Matzah, which is Pesach, Matzah, and Bakorim. He gave us the exact date, 700 years in advance, and told us exactly what he would accomplish, with the Messiah telling us about the Messiah. Dode is Gabriel, God's most courageous and compassionate man. Dode wrote 1,000 years before he fulfilled Passover that he would fulfill Passover by being crucified. He not only explains the nails that would go into his hands and to his feet, which is the Roman form of crucifixion, a form of excruciating death that wouldn't even exist for 700 years after he wrote the 22nd Psalm. He went into great detail telling us medically, physiologically, how crucifixion kills. Things that would not be known for another almost 3,000 years after he wrote the lyrics to the 22nd Mizmor in first person about his own ordeal. In the first 30 Mizmor that Dode wrote, he explained how he came to realize that he should volunteer to fulfill Passover, Matzah, and Bakorim in year 4000 Yah. He explained his motivation for doing so. He shared why God agreed with him. And then he delineated precisely how he would endure these things, adding additional detail in the 88th Psalm. And then Yahweh would celebrate all aspects of this man's 3 lives in the 89th Mizmor, or Psalm, which is the Song of Dode, the most important piece of literature ever written. The story of Dode actually starts in the Torah, the one that Moshe is writing about in the 18th chapter of Devarim is Dode. His name is mentioned 1,100 times in the Torah and prophets. The mythical individual that Paul created, now known as Jesus Christ, is not named once. There's not a single prophecy that speaks of him or anything that he would accomplish, because he didn't exist. But there are hundreds upon hundreds of prophecies pertaining to what David would do in his second of three lives in fulfilling Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim. He was the Passover lamb. Recognizing that Dod is the Messiah, that he is the Son of God. God calls him his son 3 different times. He says, I am his father. He says this of no one else. He anointed Dod 3 times as well, all symbolic of the 3 lives that Dod would live on our behalf. Dod is the returning king, not only of Israel, but of the world. I am his herald, a Bashar. And when we consider what was written in the prophets, particularly what Isaiah would say 300 years thereafter, 2,700 years ago, every prophecy that pertains to our salvation points to Dod. He's named, and all of them. It is Dod who is named in 2 Samuel 7, I think the greatest prophecy ever written. It's Dod who is named in Isaiah 9 that speaks of the Son who will be given to us. It is Dod who is named in the presentation of crucifixion and fulfilling Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim in the 22nd Psalm. The entire 89th Psalm is devoted to the Son of God and Messiah, the Zeroah, who is the sacrificial lamb of Passover, and to the returning king, scribed by Yahowah. In year 968 BCE, the year the cornerstone of the house for Yahweh's name was laid on Mount Moriah, year 3000 Yah, so that we would know. And even though the evidence is overwhelming, the evidence is irrefutable, the evidence is proven through both the Dead Sea Scrolls and through the countless prophecies contained in it, I was the first to discover it. 3,000 years. That isn't perchance, because there are hundreds of prophecies pertaining to the one who would not only discover this, the most profound finding in all of human history. Nothing is more important than discovering that Dod fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim, because it means there was no Jesus Christ. There is no basis whatsoever to the Christian religion. We can clear away all that muck so that you can see the truth clearly, profoundly. Israel doesn't need to be led astray by the rabbis who foisted another false Messiah to counter the one that Paul had created, with Bar Kokhba being the false Messiah of the Jews, the very false Messiah that Rabbi Akiba, the founder of Rabbinic Judaism, used, that caused the Romans under Hadrian to return to butcher Jews. As a matter of fact, it is what led to the renaming of the land as Palestina, from which the lie of the Muslims trying to perpetrate genocide against Jews, calling themselves Palestinians, emerged. It was the fault of Rabbi Akiba. Rabbi Akiba is the one who caused the diaspora by promoting this false Messiah, Bar Kokhba, son of a star. And that led to the Holocaust. He duped Jews with a false Messiah so they wouldn't recognize that 100 years prior, exactly, he did this in 133, when it was in 33, the Yobel year, 4,000 Yah, that Dod fulfilled these prophecies. And he did so to hide the actual Messiah and Son of God, our Savior, from Jews, costing millions of Jews their souls over that period of time. The fact that it also cost billions of goyim of their souls is concerning, but not nearly as bothersome to Yahowah, Dod's father, because of his own people that turned on him. And even in Christianity, Paul was a rabbi. He was Jewish. Had he not been a rabbi, he would not have been able to do what he did in creating the Christian New Testament. He is the one who was schooled enough in the Torah and prophets that he knew where to look to misappropriate the text, and he had the rabbinical mindset of twisting things to be argumentative with God. Rabbis trained a rabbi, and he created the religion that demonized Jews, blamed Jews for killing the mythical Christian God, the God-man. Now, of course, it wasn't true. Well, the myth never existed. But even if you want to pretend that there was a real person that was crucified at that time, it most certainly wasn't the Jews who crucified him. It was the Romans. And there was actually a man who was crucified by the Romans fulfilling Passover. His name was King David. Had Jews actually been responsible for setting David up as the Messiah to be crucified on Passover, fulfilling the promise of Passover for us to receive the benefit of eternal life, opening the door to God's home, they should have been commended for doing so, but unfortunately they were asleep at the switch. They knew it was year 4000 Yah. They knew what was going to happen. There had been hundreds of prophecies. They're all very clear as to who was going to arrive, exactly what day he was going to arrive, and yet they paid no attention to it. They abandoned the Messiah who had come to save them. And that left the door open 20 years later for Paul to perpetrate his heinous fraud. It is essential that we dispel the myth of Christianity, dispel the myth of Jesus Christ, because that lie is an act of identity theft. Jesus is Dode slathered with a heavy dose of Dionysus. And because it is a product of identity theft, until we rid the world of the counterfeit, it is far more difficult to help God's people, Jews, see the truth about the fulfillment of Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim, what it means to them, how it occurred, why it occurred, when it occurred, who fulfilled this, what his relationship was with Yahowah. Nothing is more important for God's people. And that is the reason I expose and condemn Christianity. I don't do it to save Christians. Long time ago, I had been one, and when I learned the truth that the religion was a fraud, I wanted to save Christians from Christianity. I don't care anymore. First time is too short, and I realize also that there is no saving a religious person from their religion. Religion is very good at being bad. It is exceedingly effective at nullifying the effect of evidence and reason. And so there is no way to convince a religious person that their faith is untrue, because religion isn't based upon evidence and reason. It's based on faith and beliefs, and they are impervious to truth. I do this because I serve Yahowah. I serve Dode, God's chosen king for his people. I work for Yehudim, the Jews, and for the reestablishment and restoration of Israel. That is my life. And that's why it is essential that I do two things. I must expose and condemn the religions that the rabbis have created that are so hostile to God's people. It was a rabbi who taught a rabbi. The first man actually to put in writing that he was a rabbi, taught by rabbis, is Paul. Named Shaul. His whole life is played out prophetically through King Shaul, including being demon-possessed, including nullifying the Torah, including his fate. So the first is the Rabbi Shaul Paul, whom in Chabauk Yahweh called out by name and said that he was the plague of death. I don't know if you know that or not, but 666 years before Paul would write his first letter, that to the Galatians in 52 CE, Yahweh inspired Chabauk to condemn everything associated with Shaul, Paul. The second, obviously, is that Rabbi Akiba began with the Jerusalem Talmud, which then became the Babylonian Talmud, was augmented by the Babylonian Talmud, and rabbis created rabbinical Judaism. And the father rabbinical Judaism began the same way with the false Messiah. Two false messiahs, two religions, both started by rabbis. But I said there were three. Islam would not exist if not for rabbis. Muhammad's first 80 surahs chronologically are based upon him pilfering, plagiarizing Hanif poetry. Hanif poetry were written by Arab converts to Judaism in Yemen. So the first 80 surahs of the Quran are plagiarized Judaism, including Ar-Rahman, the merciful, because rabbis have long erased Yahweh's name, so they use that as the misnomer. But it gets far worse, because rabbis in Yathrib, today's Medina, sold for a buck Talmud readings to Muhammad. Many of them just brought into the Quran wholesale, some with some hilarious twists, many bastardized considerably. But all of the surahs that have portions or all of what's now called Medina revelations are pilfered and twisted recitals from the Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, as sold to Muhammad by rabbis. It is one of the most pervasive arguments in the Quran about the fact that rabbis not only sold Muhammad these recitals, but that Muhammad ran out of money and didn't want to pay for them, stopped paying for them. And that when Muhammad not only twisted them out of their context to make them no longer even remotely credible, not that the rabbinical arguments and the Talmud and stories were credible in the first place, and then Muhammad attributed the stories that the rabbis had read from their Talmud to Allah and began to mock him. There is a standard operating procedure for all psychopaths, and Muhammad was a psychopath, and that is to kill those who threaten to expose them. And so as a direct result of the rabbis selling Muhammad Talmud stories, which he used to complete the Quran, to give the Quran a veneer of religiosity, and then mocking him when he attributed those stories to Allah, the Quran turns vehemently anti-Semitic. And Muhammad and Allah began a crusade together to perpetrate apartheid and then genocide on Jews, wiping them out, killing all of them that had been in Yathrib, of which there were 30,000 before Muhammad's invasion, and then perpetrating what turned out to be the dress rehearsal in almost every aspect at Kabar as to what happened on October 7th in 2023. Yes, the invasion, called Osca Flood, is a reenactment of Muhammad's raid on the Jewish farming community of Kabar in 620-something CE. It is a hideous story. And the truth is that without rabbis, there would be no Christianity, no Judaism, and no Islam. Now, when you consider that the Christian New Testament demonizes and dehumanizes Jews, doing so that Paul and company could claim to have stolen, taken all of the promises Yahweh made on behalf of his people and give them to the church and to Goyim because God was really mad that Jews plotted to kill him, is their message. And that as a result of that, Jews were ravaged for 1,800 years under the influence of the Roman Catholic Church, forced to live in shuttles, deprived of everything, grossly abused, and had to suffer through inquisitions, tortured by the Roman Catholic Church. All because rabbis trained Paul to act like a rabbi. It's the only reason the Holocaust occurred. Had he not done so, there would not have been the rampant anti-Semitism throughout Europe that Hitler capitalized upon. And of course, the Holocaust would not have happened without Islam, because it was the Grand Mufti al-Sistani that convinced Hitler not to exile Jews, but to exterminate them in 1941. And he did so. And without the rabbis, there is no Islam. That means there would have been no War of Independence in 1948. There had been no war, Six-Day War in 1967. There had been no Yom Kippur War in 1973. There would have been no intifadas. There would have been no October 7th of 2023. There would be no Islamic terrorism against Jews. Without Judaism, the Quran is nothing but the never-ending argument and a terrorist manifesto, a pledge to wipe out all humankind. Been a less articulate version of Genghis Khan's mantra. The rabbis changed all of that. And of course, the rabbis created the religion based on a false Messiah that caused the diaspora that ultimately led to the Holocaust. And yet, Jews, you still believe them. You're doing counting of the Omar now, which is a celebration of Bar Kokhba, a celebration of the creation of and the stupidity of the antagonistic Zohar. You continue to do these kinds of things and to believe these idiots who sold you out for a buck, for prestige. And you still believe them. But they'll never take accountability for what they have done to you. And so this is the reason that I sit here. It's when I come down to the studio and present these programs, whether it's exposing Islam or Christianity, is because I need to awaken you from the realization that you have been betrayed by Judaism. You've been betrayed by the rabbis. That every aspect of rabbinic Judaism is a lie, including Hashem and G-D. It's all a lie, including the rabbinic prayers. Yahweh's real. So is his son, Dod. But you need to know it. You need to accept it. You need to act upon it. All right, I'm going to now return to where we were at the end of our last program yesterday, where we were considering the stupidity. And I understand as I'm about to go into this that for some reason we don't know the reason at this point that we appear to have lost the Facebook stream, but the stream on X and the stream on live streams to YouTube are working. So this is a fairly easy fix. We'll download this and post it on Facebook at the end of the program, so long as we are still recording, and we're actually not recording, we're live streaming. All of these programs are live streamed. I have not done a single recorded program since YAHOWAH asked me to transition from spending all day writing to turning on the camera and speaking to you from these various studios. Every presentation has been a live stream. I want it to be raw and real. I want you to be able to look into my eyes. I want you to consider my expressions. I want you to hear the tone of my voice. I want you to realize that over the last 24 years, I have written 36 books, all long, averaging about 700 pages apiece, based upon what I have learned about YAHOWAH, the Torah, the prophets, and what I have also discovered about the falsification of God's message, the misrepresentation of God's message through the religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, such that I am now the repository of my books. All of my books are available free to you at yadayah.com or goddamnreligion.org. And I want you to go there to learn from them. I wrote them for you, and they are entirely free in their entirety. And because now I have been able to put together the entire picture, first person to do so, in the history of humankind, from creation to the garden, to the time of Jacob's troubles and our return to the garden, and have delineated every important date along the way, described all of the players in God's story, and explained each episode so that you might understand it and know exactly what has happened, so that you can appreciate what will transpire. And along the way, I have come to make many hundreds, if not thousands, of predictions as to what's going to occur relative to Israel. And my focus is on Israel. If it's a world event that is being played out and it doesn't affect Israel in any way, I pay no attention to it. My concern is Israel. And in these thousands of predictions that I have made over the past 24 years, I have never been wrong. Somebody wrote on our Facebook feed the other day, well, I only claim to be a witness. I am a student of the Torah and prophets, and I am YAHOWAH's final and last witness. But sometimes it's darn difficult to distinguish between the prophets and this witness, because this witness speaks for the prophets, and therefore he knows the future. And I want you to know it, Israel, because you are a year now from entering the time of Jacob's troubles. It's going to be worse than the experience of the Holocaust. Nothing has ever been as egregious as what you're about to endure. And it is the result of Muslims and their progressive pimps worldwide rising up against Jews and Israel. Ultimately, God's people in Israel prevail. There is going to be two harvests between now and then, Shabat and Towrah. And there will be a grand celebration in Israel on the Shabat of Towrah, the 24th of September of 2033, which is year 6000 Yah, when a man, as the red heifer, the Adam Parah, will be sacrificed as the final offering through one of the Moedim to prepare the adulterous woman that is Yisrael to be betrothed to her returning king, who is Dod. And it will be orchestrated by the most acclaimed orator of all time, Elijah. With YAHOWAH once again doing the honors, he will provide copious amounts of water and ignite the flames, which will soar to the heavens. And through Numbers 19, he will achieve the result of Numbers 5, so that God's people can be restored prior to the ultimate homecoming and wedding on Yom Kippurim, the day of reconciliations. October 2nd, 6:22 p.m. as the sun sets, when Dod, the Messiah and Son of God, our King, returns with YAHOWAH, his Father. I want you to be there. My entire life is devoted to encouraging you to be among those who are there. All right, so this is the Paul's statement with the Greek text. It says, but because with the Torah is from Nomo. We know that Nomo is his perverted rendering of Torah, because in Dabadim, the place that this was pilfered, where he is representing Torah with Nomo, it actually says Torah. So Paul unequivocally is using Nomo to say Torah. So because with the Torah, absolutely no one, not nobody, not no way, not no how, is vindicated or justified, is shown to be correct, proper, right, acquitted, in the opinion of the God, because it is evident. Those who are correct, righteous, and who prosper out of faith will live. It's Galatians 3:11. So after saying that the Torah cannot save, that it condemns everyone, it was just a cruel plot by that God of what Paul calls the Old Testament. Now he's saying that it's evident that the Torah can't save, because somewhere it must say that those who are correct, righteous, and prosper out of faith, pistis, will live. Buffed up and polished in the King James, Paul sounds a bit more eloquent, albeit no more rational. King James reads, but that no man is justified by the law in the sight of God. It is evident, for the just shall live by faith. Updated for modern sensibilities, the New Living Translation, or paraphrase, presents the passage as, so it is clear. Anytime you hear it is clear, you know you're being lied to. So it is clear that no one can be made right with God by trying to keep the law. For Scripture says, by the way, there is no word even remotely akin to Scripture from God. It is nothing but a Latin term that is changed, Latin term for writing, that has been changed to give it a religious sense of authority. For Scripture says, it is through faith that a righteous person has life. Galatians 3:11. No, it doesn't. And yet, Paul's first point was anything but clear, because he misquoted, misrepresented a passage which contradicted his premise. But more telling still, the Torah does not actually say anything about faith, much less that one's beliefs lead to being just or righteous. God doesn't want us to believe him. He's not soliciting faith. Faith is the opposite of knowing. You only have faith when you don't know. If you don't understand, you believe. the purpose of prophecy throughout the Torah and prophets is to prove God's not only existence, but his inspiration of those texts. It is so that you might know. The Torah actually is from the verb yara. It means to teach, to guide, to instruct, to direct, so that you can know. And once you know, there is no reason for faith. There's no reason to believe. Knowing is vastly superior. And you cannot be right through faith. You can only be right by knowing and understanding. Of course, both of Paul's positions are illogical. Even if one was justified by the Torah without committing the rational fallacy of non sequitur, one could not imply that the righteous shall live by faith. The non sequitur. Rather than cause and effect, these ideas are unrelated. It's like saying red wagons do not work, so it's evident that we should put our faith in blue tricycles. I mean, I understand that today people are indoctrinated. The under 30 group has no concept of what debate actually means. They don't know anything about rational fallacies. They'd never heard of a non sequitur. It doesn't follow. But what Paul just said is equivalent to my summarization. Red wagons don't work, so it's evident we should put our faith in blue tricycles. More to the point, if God's Torah cannot be relied upon, in whom are we to express faith? As I previously mentioned, the scriptures, because there is no such thing, it's God's writings, Torah, prophets, and Psalms, do not say it is through faith that a righteous person has life. The passage that Shaul has truncated actually condemns him personally, as well as what he was promoting. Speaking specifically of Shaul, Paulos, and actually naming him in the next line, the passage he misappropriated and misquoted reads, pay attention, he will be puffed up with false pride. His soul is not right or straightforward in him. So, through trust and reliance, by being firmly established and upheld by that which is dependable and truthful, those who are correct and thus vindicated shall live. Chabauk, Habakkuk 2:4. God's message is exactly the opposite of Paul's. Paul's ruse is almost breathtaking in its audacity. This time, the biggest issue is not just the inaccurate and inappropriate nature of Paul's rendition of the citation, where he has once again misrepresented Yahweh's intent by twisting a snippet of what God said out of context to invert the actual message. What is amazing here is that Yahweh is specifically warning us about Shaul, about Paul, in this very statement. So by quoting it, Paul is taunting his audience, arrogantly implying that those foolish enough to fall for his inane rhetoric aren't sufficiently resourceful or rational to realize that God is telling us not to trust Paul and to trust him instead. And in 2,000 years of theologians and pastors and popes and cardinals and priests, not a single one of them was honest enough to tell you what I have just told you. And yet it's obvious, it's undeniable. Why would they hide this obvious refutation of Paul from you? If not to deliberately deceive so they could control you. This realization is so condemning. There will be 2 subsequent chapters of Twistianity that all amplify the entirety of God's indictment regarding Shaul, Paul. All of it. Everything that Habakkuk was inspired to reveal about this man, and it is riveting with the precision that God deployed 666 years before Paul would write his first letter in 52 CE to the Galatians, condemning him in every possible way. But for now, I want you to ponder these highlights that are conveyed through Yahweh's prophets, Habakkuk, which means embrace this. Habakkuk, 666 years before Paul misquoted him in Galatians. Upon my requirements and responsibilities, I have decided that I will literally and continually stand. This is God speaking through Habakkuk. Upon my requirements and responsibilities, I have decided that I will literally and continually stand, and I will choose to always present myself upon that which protects and fortifies. So then, I will be on the lookout to see what he will say about me, observing how he will go about questioning me. So then, how can I be expected to change my attitude, my thinking, my response concerning my disapproving rebuke? Habakkuk, embrace this, Habakkuk 2:1. Then Yahweh responded, approaching me, and he said, write this revelation and expound upon and reiterate it using letters upon writing tablets, so that by reciting this, he might run away and go. Habakkuk 2:2. Write it down. Write it down so that you might use it against him. Still, indeed, this revelation from God is for the moed, the restoring witness to the appointed meeting times. It provides a witness and speaks, pouring out evidence in the end, which entraps. The extended period of time required for this question to be resolved shall not prove it false. Expect him in this regard, because indeed he will absolutely come, neither being delayed nor lingering. Habakkuk, embrace this, 2:3. Do you think about the details of this? God is telling you that this revelation pertains to the moed, the appointed meeting times, the restoring witness, which means that he is saying that when Dode comes to fulfill the moed, as God even revealed in the 4th day of creation, speaking of the greater and lesser luminaries working together to fulfill the moed, these restoring witnesses to the eternal testimony regarding the appointment meeting times, that this will be when this will happen, this egregious act. That would be when Dode came to fulfill the Moedim, year 4000 Yah. It would also be that this declaration, the acknowledgement of what Shaul Paul had done to condemn Jews, God's people, as a result of his writings, would be made known to you by another individual who is also fulfilling the moed, who also will come. And he will come in the last days, and he will be the witness who pours out evidence entrapping the perpetrator, Paul. This is a prophecy that is being fulfilled now before your eyes and ears, so that you might know the truth. So it's not just that this was written 666 years before Paul would pen this disastrous letter that condemns the Torah and Yahowah and condemns everyone who believes him to the loss of their souls. It would not be understood until Yahowah had the lesser luminary, pursuant to the moed of the fourth day of creation, reflecting the greater luminary's light, Dode, its light, that it would be explained for you in the last days, which is what I'm doing. So expect him in this regard, because indeed he will absolutely come, neither delayed nor lingering. Pay attention. He will be puffed up with false pride. His soul is not right or straightforward in him. Paul was an arrogant jerk. Conceit is his middle name. He, even wallowing in his own conceit, admitted that he was demon-possessed at the conclusion of 2 Corinthians. Therefore, through trust and reliance, by being firmly established and upheld by that which is dependable and truthful, those who are correct and thus vindicated shall live. Habakkuk 2:4. That's saying the antidote for Appalling Christianity is the truth. Know the truth, rely on it, and you'll live. Moreover, because of the intoxicating wine and inebriating spirit of the man of deceptive infidelity and treacherous betrayal, is a high-minded moral failure and is arrogant with meritless presumptions, he will not rest, nor find peace, nor live. Whoever is open to the broad path, this duplicitous and improper way associated with Shaul. He named him by name. God, 666 years before Paul's poisonous pen stained the first codex letter that he would scribe, God called him out, and he called him treacherous, a betrayer, a moral failure with meritless presumptions. He named him Shaul. That's the Paul of the New Testament. How's that for specificity as a prophecy? I don't know how they get any better than that. Moreover, because of the intoxicating and inebriating spirit of the man of deceptive infidelity and treacherous betrayal, he's a high-minded moral failure. He's arrogant and meritless in his presumptions. So he will not rest or find peace, nor live. Whoever is open to the broad path, this duplicitous and improper way associated with Shaul, Paul. He and his soul are considered the plague of death. And those who are brought together by him, accepting him, will never be satisfied. Most every Gentile will gather unto him, all of the people from different races and places. There has been nothing to compare with the popularity among Gentiles of the Christian religion. The most popular religion ever perpetrated, and it was conceived by a man born as Shaul. Told us that his name was Shaul. He's the one who changed it to Apollos because it sounded a lot like Apollo. God just called the author of the first 14 books and the inspiration between the next three, Mark, Luke, and Acts, the plague of death. He said that he would create a religion that would gather almost all Gentiles into it, which he did. They do not ask questions, any of them, about him. terse references to the word they lift up as taunts to ridicule, along with elusive sayings, simplistic and contrived equivalences, and mocking interpretations, controlling through comparison, counterfeit, and cliches, along with derisive words arrogantly conveyed. It's the essence of Paul's letters, the essence of Christianity. God just described the Christian New Testament exactly as it is. There will be hard and perplexing questions which will need to be asked of him, and double dealings to be known regarding him. That's why I wrote Twistianity. That's why I'm bringing you this program. My job. And so they should say, woe to the one who claims to be great so as to increase his offspring, acting like a rabbi. Neither apply to him. For how long will they make pledges based upon his significance, becoming burdened by his testimony? Shabat 2:6. Evidence, my friends, just does not get any more compelling or relevant than this. The prophecy continues to be exacting, pinpointing one man who was called out by name and the religion that would be so popular among Gentiles. Paul, the author and inspiration of the Christian New Testament. God condemned this man, and yet Shaul, as arrogant as Satan himself, having so little respect for humankind, took us directly to a prophecy that Yahweh had revealed to warn his people to Shaul to question him and to avoid Paul as the plague of death. This is the man that invented Jesus. This is the man that invented Christianity. This is the man that wrote the first 14 books of the Christian New Testament and then inspired the next 3, Mark, Luke, and Acts. And this is what God had to say about him 666 years to the time that Paul would scribe his opening salvo, Galatians, where he would do exactly what God said he would do. Yahweh revealed that a man named Shaul would arrogantly mislead and intoxicate Gentiles with irrational rhetoric, coterminous with the time Dode would fulfill the Moed, the restoring witnesses to the appointed meetings. This occurred when Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim were fulfilled in 33 CE, year 4000 Yah, by Dode. At this time, Shaul was studying to become a rabbi in Jerusalem. Further, as if he were reading Galatians, God told us that Shaul would be arrogant, circuitous, duplicitous, intoxicating, deceptive, treacherous, and of course presumptuous, which is the antithesis of being matter-of-fact and straightforward. We were warned that this pseudo-rabbi's way of would be improper, is what we're told, akin to a plague, and thus deadly, a pandemic. And yet, according to God, Shaul's broad and therefore accommodating path would become especially popular with Gentiles, because too few would question his elusive sayings, his derisive words, his comparisons and counterfeits, which would all be ripe with taunts and ridicule. Yahweh is obviously adept at producing very detailed and highly accurate prophecies. This is an example, and we are the beneficiaries. Therefore, Shaul Paul impugned himself with his perverted rendition of Yahweh's condemnation of him, twisting the knot that would become his noose. His statement was not only the antithesis of God's instructions, he engendered Yahweh's ridicule of him. What do you think the odds are that the first man in 3,000 years to correctly assess that Dowd is the Messiah, the Son of God, who fulfilled Pesach Matzon Bikurim, becoming our Savior in 33 CE, suffering crucifixion in his fulfillment of Passover, and that he is our returning King, would be the same man who would prove that there was no Jesus Christ and that Paul is the one who conceived the myth. Two things no one had ever conceived or pondered previously, not in 2,000 to 3,000 years. And the same individual has brought you both. But it doesn't stop there. He's the same fellow that reintroduced God's people to Yahweh's name. The same person who explained what the Torah actually says. Same person that presented the 5 conditions and 5 benefits of the covenant, the birth for the first time, the first person to ever tie the Bereth and the Mikre together, so that you understand how one delivers the promises of the other. The first person to ever put together the timeline of when every event transpired and when the last will be fulfilled. The first person to show you the entire picture from beginning to end and to prove that God is returning us to the very garden that we emerged from 6,000 years ago. That's a lot, isn't it? Do you think it's by chance? Apart from this prophecy, if Paul was right in disavowing Yahweh's standard, of course, it would be the equivalent of God saying, I will save those who contradict me, and I will justify those who negate and belittle the plan I have established. And yet, Yahweh introduced this prophecy in Chabauk, affirming that he was not about to change. God owns up to his responsibilities, and he acts accordingly. Now, continuing to mislead by way of senselessness and duplicitousness, the King James renders Paul's next statement, and the law is not of faith, but the man that doeth them shall live in them. Galatians 3:2. Deploying a different tactic, the New Living Translation, which is really a paraphrase, authored something which could only be considered appropriate in the context of a religion. This way of faith is very different from the way of the law, which says it is through obeying the law that a person has life. Galatians 3:12. Now, should the translation team deployed by Tensdale House Publishers Incorporated have meant that the way of the Christian faith is very different than the way of the Torah, then they would have been right. But how can the way of faith be right when it is contrary to the God who claimed to have sponsored the replacement? There is no rational way for Paul's thesis, his faith and religion, to be very different from the way delineated by God in the Torah and still reconcile fallen man into a relationship with that same God. God cannot be responsible or trustworthy with a revised plan which is counter to the one he originally authored. This is yet another nail in Paul's coffin, and that of his religion, Christianity, because it means that the very premise of the religion is impossible, is irrational. Now, irrespective of the fact that God has provided the answer, at least the battle lines are now very clearly drawn. According to the most modern translation, it is now the Torah versus Christianity. So we can roll on with the great Galatians debate. Are we to trust Yahweh's Torah or put our faith in Paul's, but I say? Now, if you're dumb enough not to know the answer to that question, then you're a person of faith. For me, I know. And I thank you for listening to this edition of Appalling Twistianity, brought to you in the Rainbow Studio of the YAHOWAH blog. I am your host, Craig Winn.